Alrighty. Hello and welcome to everyone here attending the YouTube channel broadcast of the Book Loft of German Village interview with Travis Baldree, bestselling author of Legends and Lattes and the highly anticipated follow-up Bookshops and Bonedust, both available on our website at bookloft.com, and we should have signed copies of those available soon. My name's Jason Winks, and I'll be your host tonight for the Book Loft. Travis, welcome, and thank you so kindly for taking the time to sit down and talk with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'd also like to personally thank you for creating such wonderful novels. I can tell you as a bookseller, hand selling novels like yours is the dream. When a customer trustingly holds out their hands to us as staff and asks us to absolute pleasure to be able to put your books in their hands and be able to gush to them about the incredibly cozy, comfy, wonderful, warm journey they're about to partake in.
Well, thank you so much, and it means a lot to me. So much so that that ends up being a good portion of the second book.
Just absolutely delightful. I can't even tell you how much I enjoyed both of them. Like they are
Thank you.
just phenomenal stories. For those of us who have seen interviews with you previously, will be a little familiar. But before we dig too deep into bookshops and bone dust, could you briefly go over for us some of the inspiration and story behind the creation of Legends and Lattes, explaining the why and the how that came to be written?
So, Legends and Lattes was written for National Novel Writing Month in 2021. Yes, 21. Entirely during the month of November, and it was the first National Novel Writing Month book that I ever actually completed. Um, And the idea for it was actually a bit of a joke. I am an audiobook narrator full time, and I was joking around in my Discord where I work live that what I really wanted to read, as opposed to the super action adventure stuff I was reading at the time, was a Hallmark movie set in the Forgotten Realms. I just wanted something that made me feel good, and it was a time where I was watching an awful lot of The Great British Bake Off and Fixer Upper, because it's right in the middle of COVID and you never see anybody. And the last time I've been to a coffee shop and seen somebody's face, it's been quite some time. Um, so a narrator friend of mine convinced me to try National Novel Writing Month again, and that was the idea that I chose to use. So the goal with the book was to have no real violence past the first sentence. Um, and to do a story that was basically simple and made you feel good after you were done reading it. And it wasn't until about halfway through that I realized how much of my own life I had stuck into the book, because I was a game developer for decades into my 40s, and then I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. And I quit and I moved to a new city and I became a full-time audiobook narrator. And I just discovered this whole community of narrators and book people that ended up being really essential to me. So I wrote a book about somebody who did the same job into her 40s and then quit because she decided she didn't like it anymore and moved to another city and started a new career and found this whole community of people that ended up being really essential to her. So, um, the uh, the upshot is that I wrote it. For once, I actually completed the book, and since I wanted to go through the process that a lot of the other authors I work for as a narrator go through. So I self-published it, and I commissioned a cover, and I did a professional edit, and I released it, and then things became very unexpectedly successful for a book that I didn't assume anybody would want to read.
Yeah, it kind of blew up pretty quickly for you. Word got around very fast. One of our booksellers got one of the very early copies. Like she was in from the very beginning, heard about you like on Twitter or Instagram, and was just like, "I'm in it. This sounds like so much fun." So she's the one that kind of brought it to the rest of us at the book loft.
Very appreciative. I think that cover did a lot of heavy lifting. The artwork was by an artist named Carson Lowmiller, and he really got the brief. And I think it was a situation where the book pretty much is what is on the cover. So if you see the cover and you're interested in that, that's more or less what you're getting.
Yep, it's a very easy sell for everyone. They can just get a very easy vibe looking at it like this is what I'm buying into. And you know, they've been doing cozy mysteries forever. And
Hmm.
just these last few years, there have been more and more cozy fantasies out. And I got to tell you, as a lifetime nerd, I've been reading sci-fi fantasy since I was a little boy. I'm here for it. I'm so here for it. Like you, TJ Klune, we just keep getting all these wonderful stories that we never had in our flavor before.
Becky Chambers. I feel like I feel like there's been threads of it throughout. In a lot of ways, I feel like The Hobbit is basically cozy fantasy, at least the first third of it. Um, and you look at things like Studio Ghibli movies, they all kind of have that feeling. There's a sort of safety and ultimate warmth you get from them while still having fantastical elements and a lot of food. Um, and in some ways, I think even Terry Pratchett is really kind of cozy fantasy. It's got a little bit of that arch British wit to it, but ultimately, it's fantasy books about normal people, you know, and not about wars and slaying dragons and all the rest of those kind of epic fantasy trappings.
So the human touch, the relationships built between the characters, that's what draws me into books like these. It's You just see so much beauty in those relationships, and you see the intricacies of human contact, and you're just like, yes, that is what I'm here for.
That's what I aspire to in my old age now too. When I was a kid, what sounded great was, I want to go to another world and I want to have magical powers and I want to ride a dragon. And now I'm like, I would really like to be able to make friends as an adult. This is aspirational for me.
Absolutely. There's that great TikTok that went around a while back where a guy said basically, if it's not gay, spooky, or cozy, don't invite. Like it's gotta be one of the three, if not all three, or don't bother inviting me. Yeah, in my 40s, I feel that very strongly. Speaking of, I have to ask, was Vivian always meant to fall in love with a woman, or did that happen organically as you were writing it?
It happened organically. So initially, the point was for to have a really, really strong friendship, that they were basically going to find each other and be kind of essential to each other's well-being. And the point was that was going to be the point. And then about halfway through, it just became obvious to me that it was a little bit more than that. Um, so it never really became an A plot or even a B plot because it really isn't either. It just was something that organically happened. And when it did, I liked it because I like the idea of relationships building that way. Instead of starting with like this flash of attraction and you scramble around and see if you have the pieces of a real relationship afterward, they find all those pieces first and then the relationship kind of coalesces. And to me, that feels a lot more genuine and a lot more real and a lot more enduring. Again, in my old age.
Absolutely, that is definitely how it reads. So it felt very very natural and organic and just absolutely beautiful. So as somebody who's been looking for those characters since I was a little boy and not finding them for so many years. These days there's just so much more out there and so much more available. But every really great one like these just it's just a treasure for us to find in our lives. Representation is so important to people. It helps you figure out who your people are, how you feel about yourself, the people around you, the world around you. And so seeing characters like this develop, it means the world to a lot of people. So I can imagine there's going to be some folks coming to your book signings who are just going to want to hug you to death.
It's been all the book signings have been really heartwarming, and being able to talk to people has been really spectacular. It's been easily one of the best parts of this process is hearing from people that one of these books helped or gave something in any way, even if it was just I had a rough weekend and this is what I needed. Um, or I hadn't felt like reading anything because everything got me down, and this was the thing I needed to tip me back into reading. All those things are really incredibly moving in a way that I had not expected.
That is one of the things that comes up with customers so frequently. They say, I haven't been reading for so long and I want to get back into it, but I don't want to jump into something insane that's going to be a 14 book series where it's, 700 pages each and it's going to be my whole life now. And I'm going to have to devote every
Yeah.
waking bit of energy I have to this. And Legends and Lattes, Bookshops and Bonedust is a perfect. It's right up there for me with like T.J. Klune's The House in the Cerulean Sea, which is mm, absolute favorite book of all time, I think, at this point. And they do have a kind of similar vibe. They give me all the same good feelings in my brain pan with all the chemical rushes. So a lot of people who come in and have already gotten to the House in the Cerulean Sea, which has been around just a little bit longer, I'm going to say, "Oh, you love that? You got to take this next." But for the folks that haven't been reading though, like it's a great one to say, you know what, this is exactly what you need. This will get you there. This is gonna gently bring you right back into the joy of literature, I promise.
When I get to narrate books like that, I call them chicken soup books. This makes me feel warm. I feel better when it's done. And I didn't have to read Wikipedia to figure out what was going on.
Exactly. It was not a homework assignment. It was just a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
It
And
was
not that I don't
one of
like
the best.
complex books and I don't like my epic fantasy series. I still like and enjoy those things, but I don't feel like I need to eat all one kind of meal anymore.
For sure. So, speaking of meals, food is such a huge part of both of these stories, and it's just so fun.
It was
Uh,
yeah, there was that's I think that's where the bake off comes in. I was watching a lot of baking. I was watching a lot of baking. And I have a really powerful sense memory, so a lot of my sense memories of coffee shops are smells, which are often baked goods and obviously coffee itself. So they're just in a lot of ways, they're just like a shorthand for things that make me feel good.
Sometime we'll have to get you in. We have an amazing candle from a local candle maker that's a bourbon pecan coffee.
Ooh,
Has real
sounds good.
coffee beans ground up in it, and he literally buys them next door at Stops, our little local coffee shop. It is
That
right
sounds
next
good.
door to the book loft.
Because
And
even
I
people
just
who
want to
don't
live
like to
inside.
drink coffee often like the smell of coffee, you know?
I'm not a big coffee drinker myself. It doesn't agree with me, but I love the way it smells. I love the way it tastes. So having that candle, I keep it right next to my computer desk. And yeah, as soon as you open the lid, you're there. So moving on to bookshops and bone dust. How was it conceived and why a prequel?
Well, Bookshops and Bonedust was my fourth attempt to write the second book. Um, the original book I was going to write was completely different. So, shortly after I finished writing Legends Lattes, I knew what the second book I was going to write was going to be. It was called Murders and Magestones, and it was basically fantasy murder she wrote. Um,
Yes.
and when Tor picked up Legends and Lattes, they wanted a second book. So I already knew what it was, and I told them, and they were very pleased with that idea. Time came to write it, and I outlined it all. I still thought it was fabulous. And I wrote about 20,000 words of it, and I hated it because all of the I got caught in all of the mechanics of a mystery, making sure that this clue is here and this information is gathered and so ends up where they need to be. And all the stuff I cared about got crowded out. Um, so the book just did not come together in a way that I liked. So I was horrified and I told Tor that I needed to start over. And they were fine. And so I started over again. And then the same thing happened again. And I started over again. The same thing happened again. And then the fourth time, I figured it out. And ultimately, for me, if I put the idea in front of the people, then ultimately the story ends up being kind of hollow. And I just can't get behind it. So I I harvested many organs from the corpses of those books that all ended up in bookshops and bone dust. Um, which ended up being a book about the fact that mistakes that we make aren't necessarily mistakes. They're just the foundations for something else successful happening later. So that seemed pretty appropriate given the previous couple of books and a lot of things that have happened in my life. And in a really meta way, it's a prequel about the fact that prequels have merit, that the fact that all of these other things still matter and that it doesn't matter where you ended up, these things are still important. Um, and then the other half of the book had to do with my relationship with booksellers and people who read, because after Legends and Lattes, that experience was really powerful for me. I was just kind of blown away. So having a book about a bookseller who I like, um, and about the fact that human experience put into stories allows us to connect with each other in ways I think that are really profound was also something that happened to dovetail pretty nicely with that. Um, and you already knew in Legends and Lattes that Viv was a reader, but again, it's one of those why would she be? And so it was nice to talk about all of those things. Um, so once I was off and writing that and I knew what it was and the heart of that made sense to me, I was able to write the book. Um, and honestly, I kind of like it better than the other book. Um, it's my favorite of the two.
I don't know that I could say I have a favorite because they were both just so utterly delightful. I mean, it's definitely fun to read a fantasy novel about a bookshop owner. As a bookseller of almost 2 decades myself, yeah, that was definitely so much fun. Just seeing the little bits, like obviously you have talked to a lot of booksellers in the last year at least, and so it's very obvious in the character, like you feel she is a bookseller. You know what I mean? This feels like somebody I could work with. This feels
Yep.
like one of the many booksellers I've worked with over the last few years.
Well, and what an important thing to do is to connect people with stories that are gonna make their lives better. I mean, ultimately, that's why we read them, is to make our lives better in a little way, a big way. Maybe it's profound. Maybe you just feel better on an afternoon. But I mean, ultimately, it's the job of connecting people with things that make their lives better. This is a pretty great job and worthy of worthy of respect and love.
Absolutely. That is definitely like the most fun parts of the job is the conversations with customers, directing them to things that they didn't know they needed. One of the greatest joys is the customer who comes back and says, "That was fantastic. Do you have book two? Is it a series? Have they written more?" I
Yeah.
absolutely love that thing that you pointed me at. What else you got? It's definitely a huge part of the joy in my work and what I do.
I imagine so.
So I have to ask, characters or places, any based on real people, real experiences, more specifically than just general? Like, was Zelia Great Strider based on any famous romance author? Is she your Fantasyland version of Nora Roberts or Danielle Steele?
Um, she wasn't based on a specific author. She was the protagonist of the original second book, though. She was the main character of Murders and Maidstones. Burke was in it too. Pot Roast was her pet, and Fern was her old teaching assistant. So all of those
Okay.
characters actually came from book one. Um, Usually, the characters aren't based on real people. Sometimes I have an actor in mind, like the Madrigal in book one. It has to be played by Helen Mirren. I,
Yes, I feel
um,
that.
but in general, I don't base them off of real people. Sometimes they're based off of an archetype, and then they get all of the things that make them a real person. So, in Legends and Lattes, a lot of the characters sprang from the idea of people that I was familiar with at coffee shops. Like, there's always the student that comes in and just has a water and uses the Wi-Fi. And that was Hemington, and the local community college student who is not a particularly great musician that plays in the back corner every Friday. And there's like the neighborhood cat, the cat that always shows up at the coffee shop, and everybody knows its name, but nobody knows who owns it. And that was Amity. So, but then they all get their own all get their own selves. So yeah, none that is specifically based on any one given person.
Well, they're all very well put together and so much fun. Yeah,
Well,
we've had a few bookstore cats over the years at the Book Loft. One even made its way into the logo and artwork on a lot of our merchandise. We have a really great design called the Canon design from the artist who created it for us a few years back, and there is a kitty in there who was our store cat. Not too long ago, we had a visitor, Kevin. He stayed with us for a few weeks while he was recovering. Little tiny kitten was found on somebody's front lawn in a box that just said "Help me" on it, eyes sealed shut, very sick little tiny kitten.
oh wow.
As the parents of one of our managers, and so Julie brought Kevin in to care for him every day at work while she was on her shifts, and of course TikToks and Instagram posts went out with pictures and videos of him.
I
There's even
bet.
a great one of him like picking his staff pick out of a couple of cat related books. And so next thing you know, customers are coming up to the counter like, "Where's Kevin?"
Where's Kevin?
And some of the early morning staff who hadn't even met Kevin yet. There's nobody here named Kevin. What are you talking about? I'm sure at some point we're going to end up with another cat in the store. It's just kind of the way it
That's just the
goes.
nature of things.
Somebody from the neighborhood will wander in. I've already seen a little black cat that's been nosing around, so
It's
we'll see
inevitable.
what happens.
It's the gravity of bookstores and coffee shops.
It really is. Bookstores, coffee shops, cats. Life is good. So, audiobook narration. I'm going to guess that doing that, as long as you've done that, probably helped kind of aim you in the direction of writing your own narratives, your own stories.
It definitely changed the way I did it. I wanted to write novels for a long time, and I wrote many shorts and a couple of novellas before I became a narrator. But uh, narrating, I think, has a lot to teach you about what you want to write and how you want to write that you can't learn without significantly more writing. Um, one of the things that happens when you read other people's books aloud of all different qualities and styles and goals is that because you don't read the same way that you read inside your head, you have to express everything and get behind the author's intent and understand what's happening. Um, it makes it really clear what you like and what you don't like. And it also shows you people tackling problems that you might not have tackled yet as a writer and seeing the way that they approach those in a way that is a lot more immediate than reading it in your brain. Because when you read in your brain, sometimes you're not paying attention. If something is boring for you, you just kind of skim it a little bit because your goal is to entertain yourself, not more than anything else.
Yeah.
But that's very different when you read it out loud because your goal is to pass on what the author wanted to the reader, which is not the same thing at all. Um, so I found that really illuminating. It made clear what I like and what I don't like, which isn't a very objective measure, but is a useful subjective measure. The other thing it does is I can hear my voice in my head before I say anything or write it. So I have a very clear one-to-one translation of text on a page to what it sounds like. And I think that books that are enjoyable for me to read are usually books that are also enjoyable to hear aloud, that ultimately we're going for like, what does this sound like in our heads? Which is why a lot of authors will say that after they've written, one of the best ways to edit is to read it aloud themselves. You'll find out if your dialogue sounds really clunky. You'll hear all those weird word repetitions. You'll see if that sentence is just kind of tangled. You'll see if something doesn't make sense in a way that you don't when you're just writing. But I get to do that before I write, which is actually very, very handy. It's a nice shortcut. So um, it's hard advice to give to anybody. Hey, just read thousands of hours of other people's books out loud every year. No big deal. Look at how useful this will be for you. But for me, it's been really, really powerful.
That's fantastic. That's an interesting angle I wouldn't have thought of before.
I
I
wouldn't
never
have
really,
either, which is why it was so surprising. It's just you don't think about it in those terms, but it's weirdly illuminating.
that's very cool. I'd never really gotten into audiobooks before for fiction. I tried as a teenager and found I could read much faster than an audiobook goes. And at the time, it just didn't seem like something I was into. And so I kind of got away from it. A few years back, discovered that I enjoyed nonfiction audiobooks a lot more. But for a fiction novel, something I had not read before, I definitely wanted to just read it. Then,
Hmm.
much more recently, I found it has been a wonderful way to revisit books I have already read. And so I've just been grabbing them left, right, and sideways from the Libby app and listening to all of these books that I've absolutely loved and getting
Yeah.
a much more, in-depth experience of the story that I already love.
And I
I
know a lot of
went
people who read and listen at the same time too. Like they read in the book and they have it, they do like a simultaneous thing. Um, and it's also much easier to do now than it used to be. Used to, you had to get like cassettes or CDs. It was very cumbersome and clunky and very expensive. And while it's still not like cheap, it's way more accessible and affordable than it used to be. Um,
absolutely,
and I think the art of narration has come a long way. It's not just people reading in boxes right now. There's people who know how to perform and, understand the job in a different way. Um, I still think it really gets down to who's narrating it. A good narrator can just make or break an audiobook. It's
absolutely.
it's very easy to have one that's miscast or that doesn't really get the essence of the book, just isn't the right fit. And in that case, I'd rather read it. Um, but when it works, I think it's magic.
I've had some luck so far. Gone through some books from T.J. Klune and from K.J.
Hmm.
Charles, who are both authors that I
Hmm.
absolutely adore and have
I have
read
great
lots and
narrators
lots
that
of
are
their
well paired
works.
for those too.
Yeah, and so currently I am listening to Legends and Lattes narrated by you, and absolutely enjoying it. You are definitely a very talented narrator. How much did you enjoy narrating your own book?
Oh, it was a ball. It was the easiest thing ever to narrate because you know what everybody sounds like, you know how everything is pronounced, you know exactly what every sentence wants to do. And I already heard it in my head once. So it was just it was just kind of like dancing through it. It was really, maybe dancing is not the right words to use. I'm not a good dancer, but it felt very graceful to do.
Well, I've very much been enjoying listening. Just started it like 2 days ago, so about halfway through at the moment. And
I'm glad.
yeah, the,
Thank
the
you.
the joy that you experience doing it, both the writing and then the narrating, definitely comes through in the listen. So it's been a really good listen so far. I'm really enjoying it.
It's all about those. "Hmms."
So, what is your writing process like these days? Like, do you have any special things that you like to do to prepare yourself to sit down for writing? Do you have a candle that you love? Particular, do you need a latte?
My writing process is very boring. I do my normal day job, go upstairs, have dinner, see the kids, and then I come down in the evening back into this box that I'm sitting in right now. And I sit down and I put on one big playlist that has every song I've ever liked just for the noise. And I write a chapter until it's done and then I get out. And that's it. There's no, I, I wish that I had something cool. I wish that it was more glamorous. I wish that I could go right on a deck somewhere and stare at the sunset or do it in a coffee shop, but that just doesn't work for me. I have to sit in this boring box with no distractions and no snacks and just do my work until I leave.
That's valid. Well, you do what works for you. So, um, got a couple more questions here for you. That if anybody watching has questions they would like asked for them, please absolutely add those to the comments, and we'll finish up with those if there's anything there. Um, so, what's been your toughest criticism and your highest compliment so far as a writer?
Toughest criticism. Um, I think um, I think that if there's a most common criticism, it's probably that in the book everything's too easy, and that um, that the world building is too much of a light touch, um, which is fair. Uh, but in some ways, I think those are a feature rather than a bug. It just depends on what you want. Um, every book doesn't have to be the same thing. Um, so I think for certain people, it's just not the right book for them right now, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be. There's a lot of books I have liked in my life that I only liked at that given time in my life because that was what I needed right then. And now I don't need it. Now I need a different book, and that's fine. Um, and so but I come from video games where criticism is extremely pointed and caustic. So I'm just fine if people don't like something or it isn't for them. Um, I'm just because sometimes it isn't for them, and that's great. Um, the best compliment I've gotten is that it is honestly that yeah, it got somebody back into reading. That's kind of a really big deal, or that it helped them when they were going through a really difficult time. And either of those just even if you don't if you write a book and it only does that for one person, like that's pretty great. Um, so I've had
Pretty
more than
sure
one
we're up
person see
higher
that,
than
and I will
one.
take it. You know, having more than one person is just like it's an embarrassment of riches. So, um, I'm sure if I thought really hard about it, I could come up with some better criticisms. I'm sure there's lots of criticisms to be made. I'm still a baby writer. I know that if I look back on the book in another couple of years, I will find all kinds of things I would have wanted to do differently. And I didn't really write it with the expectation of it having to endure any criticism either. So, um, I didn't really expect anybody would read it. I wanted to do a good job, wanted to do a professional job, but I wasn't spending a lot of time anticipating what people would maybe object to or wish had been done differently.
That's fair. So I thought the world building was the exact light touch it needed to be. You know, the focus was so clearly on the relationships between the characters and the journeys they were on and the impacts that their relationships were having with each other. I heard you say before in another interview, everybody knows what an orc is at this point. And,
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Like, you dove right into that world, and I didn't need more explanation than what was there.
yeah, because
I definitely.
it wasn't intended to be fantasy tourism. It was intended to be bring the fantasy world to you with as little work as possible because it's basically comfort food. Which I mean, you can definitely quibble with the intent of that, but that was my intent was for it to be comforting and to not to open the door as wide as possible. Um,
So, got a question from a fan. Alex wants to know, in your mind, how many adventures of Viv and her old adventuring party do you have ideas about?
um, I it's all kind of vague. She goes through a series of adventuring parties. She spends a while with Rackham's Ravens from Bookshops and Bonedust before she moves on. And I think she and Galena are together in part and come back together, and that's part of the way that she ends up with the group that she ends up with right before Legends and Lattes. So I think she covers some ground. But here's the way I do background and world building in books. I basically treat them like furniture under sheets. So I know the shape of these things. I know that there's a big lump here and there's probably a chair over there and maybe that's a couch. But until I actually have to write them, I don't twitch back the sheets because oftentimes I feel like I will have found something else interesting and I won't. And if I get there, I may want it to be an ottoman and not a sofa or something. Maybe this needs to be maybe this needs to be a futon. Um, and I'll have the flexibility to do that. But as long as I know the basic shape of the things under the sheet, I can keep from writing myself into a corner. And I do have a good sense of why is this person the way they are. But I don't really get into those details until I have to. I when I was younger, when I wanted to write a fantasy novel, I wrote a glossary that was like 50 pages long before I started writing. And now I'm the opposite of that. I don't want a glossary. because I only want to tell you about the world from the perspective of the people that are experiencing it right now and what they care about. Just because that's one of the things I learned from narrating. It's what I like. Um, so that, I know she's done a lot, but I couldn't tell you specifics until I get to them.
Ooh, fair enough. So, Emily would like to know, do you play Dungeons and Dragons? And if so, what kind of character are you?
So the last time I played tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, rather except for a one shot I did at a book event about a year ago, was in high school, and I never found a group after that. But I played a lot of digital Dungeons and Dragons, so the old Infinity Engine games, and I've got Gate 3 sitting here, but with the time investment is insane, so I'm never going to make any headway. I played the old Planescape games, and as a game developer, I spent years making action role-playing games. So I'm very either like D&D adjacent or digital D&D. Um, and I my preference because of that has always been the party. I like the party. I like the makeup of people, not just the character that I'm doing. So sadly, especially in olden days, I always made a really boring character because I was surrounding them with all the interesting party characters from the digital game. So I would make some sword and board nobody, a paladin, a fighter, something boring. But then I had all the cool characters around them, which probably is why I write books the way I do. I like the group and I like them better as a group. People ask me which character is my favorite, and I'm always like, I like them together because that's when I get to see them do interesting things. So that was a very roundabout answer.
But a fair one, a fair one. I'm currently in a campaign myself playing a half elf, half fae druid and having a lot of fun with that. Got a great crew of people. There's like seven of us who get
Nice.
together fairly regularly. Not too long ago, we actually went and stayed at a castle for a weekend and played
Oh, wow.
D&D at a
I bet that was
castle.
amazing.
Weirdly, a lot of castles in Ohio, which is not a thing you would
That
think, but
that is not a thing I would think.
there are quite a few in Ohio, so
Hmm.
you're able to actually go do that. So, let's see. Authors that you recommend to people when
Authors
you're
that I
talking
recommend
books
to people.
with friends or with fans or with anybody, and you're
I
like,
really
"Oh
like
my God, I
Robin
just read
Hobb.
this and it was amazing." Oh, Robin Hobb,
Robin
yes.
Hobb. I like Ursula Vernon T. Kingfisher. Um, I recently read an arc for a book by Jared Pekacek called The West Passage, which comes out next summer, which I really enjoyed. Heavy duty Gormenghast vibes. I um I like Robert Jackson Bennett. I really like Stephen King. I like the way he writes a lot. I really enjoy those. Almost everything he's written. Um, I I cannot remember the name of the author, and it's bothering me. But The Library at Mount Char is a book that I love unreservedly. It's so weird. Um, gosh, who else? I mean, I could probably just sit here and keep naming people. I like a lot of different authors.
I'm
Um,
with you on the Robin Hobb 100%. The Live Ship Trader series is like one of my favorite series of all time.
she really just knows how to crush your heart, though.
Oh, so hard, but she gives it back to you in the end. Like I always tell people, like the third book of that series, it just has one of my favorite sentences I've ever read. It's only four words, and it's just like a perfect wrap up for a character's journey to let you know that she survived her journey and she still has the same spark of, you know, hope and creativity and
Hmm.
personality. Like she's still her, no matter how much she got beat down on the journey on the way there. Like she still got that childish wonder and excitement for things. And yeah,
For whatever reason, that
Robin
reminds
Hobb,
me I have to add Ursula Le Guin to the pile there. So
absolutely. So, if I were to make a recommendation to you based on the ones that you've told me so far, I would say with your love of Stephen King, if you haven't dig into Robert R. McCammon, his
I
book Swan
have.
Song,
I
have
have.
you?
Hmm. I have. I like Robert
Fantastic.
McCann. And also the one, is it called, it's not called Boy's Life? The one that he
Yep.
wrote? I love that one too.
Yeah. That one and Swan Song always reminds me a lot of The Stand, only I found it
Hmm.
a little faster paced, honestly. So I
Hmm.
dug that. For some of the other vibes, have you done Lois McMaster Bujold yet? The
I,
Curse of Chalion.
I have. It's been a while though. It's been a while.
It's worth a redig. I've offered that one up to a lot of folks who are big fans of Game of Thrones and don't know what to do with themselves because they can't get any more Game of Thrones right now. So that's been one I've been
That's a good
sliding across the
recommendation.
counter at folks.
That's a good recommendation.
Um, Not seeing any more questions from the audience at the moment. So I just have a couple left here for you from me, which would be what's your favorite coffee shop and what's your favorite bookshop?
Um, my favorite coffee shop was El Diablo in Seattle, which was a coffee shop I went to for like 15 years. My family would walk there. It closed sadly during COVID, but a lot of good memories from there. If you have to pick a current one, there's a coffee shop downtown in Spokane where I live called Atticus, which is really lovely. Favorite bookshop. This is hard. Um, Elliott Bay Books in Seattle is pretty great. But I, I really don't like to cut out any bookshops as being my favorite bookshop. Auntie's downtown here is fabulous. All bookshops are good. It's really hard to pick a favorite bookshop because they're all good. Um, and I
That's
saw a lot
valid.
of great ones when I just finished my book tour. There was just so many great bookshops. It was amazing. So I'm just gonna have to choose the bookshop. But
My husband's always surprised no matter where we go. I look for the bookshops and he's like, you work in a bookshop. You look at books all day long. What are you doing? I'm like, it's a bookshop. I gotta check it out. I gotta look around. I gotta
it's
feel
filled
the
with books
vibe.
and book people.
I mean, he shouldn't complain. That's how we met. We met in a bookshop. He came into the bookstore I worked at. So,
That's sweet.
oh, it looks like we've got some more questions for you from the audience. As a beginner writer myself, do you prefer short or long stories? That's from Tevin.
I really like short stories. I do enjoy short stories and novellas a lot because I think that the restrictions of the medium make you get to the point. Um, I I like stories that don't waste my time. That doesn't mean they have to be short, but if there's length, I like it to be spent on something changing, on like the end of this chapter, something is different than the start of this chapter. The person is different, the situation is different, something has evolved. And I get frustrated with books that don't do that. In general, I like brisk chapters too, because the easiest way to keep me in a book is to finish a chapter and it wasn't that long and I can read another one. But if once I'm in a chapter that takes me like an hour to read, I have to, as soon as I have to find some place to tap out in the middle, it's hard for me to pick it up again. So I like a brisk pace when it makes sense. I like plenty of
Absolutely.
big books, but they tend to be books that manage to keep me engaged because they're always asking some question and then answering another question. And I've always got that satisfaction of asking and answering. As far as on the writing side, I think it's worth, if you're a beginning writer, writing a short book. Because one of the things I learned from writing Legends and Lattes is that a simple idea there's nothing wrong with that, can have merit. And a story that you can hold in your head uh, and write all the way to the end, you have a much greater likelihood of being able to do it. So I think don't be scared of writing a short book and don't feel like you have to write a long one to meet some sort of author legitimacy.
Fair enough. Tevin had also asked, will there be more books in your fantasy world?
There will be at least one. I signed for 3 more books with Tor. They'll let me do whatever I want, but at least one of them will be in the same world. If I'm lucky, maybe I'll get back to that mystery that didn't work out. I think I may have figured out how to tell one that doesn't get me lost in the weeds of the particulars of mysteries, but I'm not going to promise that.
Well, maybe now that you've had a little gap between where you were doing the murder by number, put the pieces in place,
Mhm.
maybe that's something you can go back to and then just get into the spirit of the characters with the bones that
Yep.
you already threw down.
Yeah, I wrote a little short to try and test it out, and I liked the short, so
Nice.
that may evolve into the book.
We might get some Murder She Wrote slash Agatha Raisin style fantasy.
It's going to be weirder than that. It's probably way more like Columbo, or, it's like a chaos goblin solving mysteries, and you can't even tell whether she did it on purpose. I'm
That's fantastic. I'm here for that. A hillbilly abroad wants to know, what advice do you have for someone who wants to get their first book published?
To get your first book published. So if I were to go back in time, I would still self-publish first, because it is one, it's fast. Two, it's totally valid, and I know many very, very successful self-published authors, and Legends Lattes was very successful self-published. There's just not any gatekeepers. It does involve more work for you. You need to, I think it's important to have your book well edited, to have a well-made cover, and to treat it like a real professional endeavor. But um, you can write and deliver and sell a very professional book. And the nice thing about that is that you can find out if it works fast. If you write a book and you put it, and you have to get an agent, and then you put it out on submission, all that process takes a lot of time. And then even once it's picked up, it's even more time till the book comes out, more than a year, probably. So you sit on your book for how many years until you find out if anybody even likes it? If it does what you want it to do. If you can release in a shorter period of time as an indie, you can find out if people like it. And if they don't, you can adjust and write something new, and not sit on tenterhooks waiting for it to come out, hoping that this is the one that really goes. Um, because
A
every
lot
book
more
you write,
direct feedback.
yeah, direct feedback, and just the ability to release yourself from the waiting. Write the book, see how it does. If it doesn't do great, who cares? Write another book. And you didn't wait a few years to do that. You just waited a little bit of time. Um, uh, and then you can compare, and you can see what those experiences are like. And I think there's a lot of value in that. Um, there are many advantages to being an indie. One, you get paid monthly. You have total control. You can watch what your sales are doing and put a book on sale if it seems to be dipping one month. Um, Once you go traditional, everything's going to be very different. It's a much longer time scale. You get paid twice a year if you're getting paid. And you just don't have a lot of control overall. So don't feel like you have to be traditionally published to be successful. There's also lots of traditionally published authors that now do both. They generally call it hybrid publishing. They'll do one traditional published book, which might take forever, and maybe they'll release one or two self-pubbed in between, because they can just do that. They can act immediately with their story idea. They don't have to get anybody else on board. Um, and I don't know, there's just a lot of validity to that.
Fantastic. Kevin was also just commenting that he's been editing a second draft of the first novella for my novel month challenge. My setting's a small town with townsfolk defending their home against a group of mountain orc bandits. Simple plot, not too long and complicated for my first short story.
That sounds great.
Sounds fun. I do like a good orc tale, as evidenced by the amazing and uh, the sticker sheet.
Oh, the stickers are so good.
Ah, so good. I haven't committed to where they're going yet, but
That's
cannot tell
the
you how
that's the
happy I
continuous
am to
peril
have
of stickers.
them.
Just having a bunch of stickers that you never adhere to anything. That's the way I do stickers. Can't commit.
And do you remember from the what 70s and 80s the rub offs? You remember those guys?
Mm-hmm.
I
And
have
the
several
puffy ones.
sheets of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rub offs still that
Oh, wow.
sitting in a drawer at home. Occasionally I look at them. Have not committed to putting them anywhere in all
Really
this
tough to
time.
commit.
Stickers are forever. Alrighty. Well, um, I cannot tell you how much I've appreciated your time with us tonight. Should opportunity arise and you're going to be in our neck of the woods, you definitely need to come by the book loft, whether it's for an actual event for you or just to come in and browse
Oh,
and
yeah, I'd love
shop and
to.
get lost in the stacks and have some fun.
I'd love to.
definitely check us out. For everybody at home, Legends and Lattes, Bookshops and Bonedust, absolutely phenomenal. They are available in store or through our website, bookloft.com. We do have free shipping today and tomorrow. Our Cyber Monday deal that just saw got extended to tomorrow. So no shipping fees if you're ordering today or tomorrow. Enjoy that. Well, Travis, it has been an absolute pleasure. And I
And
thank you
pleasure's
so
been
much
mine. Thank you so much.
for spending the time and for creating these wonderful stories for us all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching.